January 7th, 1945, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery stood before a room full of reporters at his headquarters in Belgium. He himself had summoned them there against the advice of his staff. He intended to settle accounts. He wore the beret everyone recognized with two badges pinned to it like a signature. He looked calm, almost pleased with the balance of it all. The German counteroffensive had been stopped. The maps were gradually tilting in favor of the Allies. Montgomery believed this was the moment to explain who had held the line and who, in his view, had restored order. The Battle of the Ardennes had ended only a few days earlier. Snow still blanketed the Ardennes region. American units were still tallying casualties. Graves were still being erected. The reporters expected the familiar language of a press conference. They expected charts, casualty figures, a cautious forecast. Instead, they were about to hear a victory recounted in the first person. Within days, the repercussions would reach the highest levels of the alliance. Not a dispute over tactics, but a crisis of leadership and national pride. The kind of crisis that spreads in hours, not weeks. To understand why a press conference could cause such turmoil, one must go back to the morning when the fighting in the Ardennes erupted. To understand why those words mattered, the battle must be rewound. December 16th, 1944. Before dawn, German artillery tears into the Ardennes. 29 German divisions surged through Belgium and Luxembourg, smashing into thinly held American lines. Hitler's objective is simple and desperate. Split the Allied front, reach Antwerp, shatter the coalition before it reaches the Rhine. The attack achieves near total surprise. Fog grounds Allied aircraft, snow and forest mask movement. American infantry units are hit in darkness, some still rotating into position. Within 48 hours, the German penetration reaches nearly 60 meters. Regiments are cut off, command posts lose contact, roads clog with refugees, fuel convoys, and retreating units moving in opposite directions. For the United States Army, this becomes the largest and bloodiest battle it will ever fight. More than 89,000 casualties over 6 weeks. Killed, wounded, missing, frozen. By December 20th, the problem is no longer just German momentum. It is the geometry of the battlefield itself. The German salient has effectively split General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group in two. Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg struggles to maintain reliable communication with American forces north of the penetration. Telephone lines are severed. Radio traffic is erratic. Orders arrive late, if at all. At the very moment, coordination matters most. The command structure is fractured. The line is bending. Not broken, but dangerously misaligned. And at Supreme Headquarters, that reality demands a decision. December 20th, 1944. Versailles is cold and crowded with maps. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower stands over the situation, bored. The German salient marked in red. The front is no longer a line. It is a wound pushed deep into Allied territory. The American command problem is immediate. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group has been split. Communications to the north are unreliable. Coordination is slowing by the hour. Eisenhower's responsibility is not pride. It is containment. He makes a decision that will solve one problem and create another. All Allied forces north of the German penetration will temporarily fall under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's command. The U.S. First Army under General Courtney Hodges. The U.S. Ninth Army under General William Simpson. Two American field armies removed from Bradley's control. Operationally, the logic is clean. Montgomery's headquarters is closer. His lines of communication are intact. He commands the British 21st Army Group already holding the northern sector. Politically, the consequences are radioactive. When Eisenhower informed Bradley, the normally courteous general exploded. Historical accounts record his exact words. "By God, Ike, I cannot be responsible to the American people if you do this. I resign." Eisenhower turned red, took a breath, replied evenly, "Brad, I, not you, am responsible to the American people. Your resignation, therefore, means absolutely nothing." But Bradley understood what this looked like. The Americans had been caught by surprise. They had been hit hard. Now a British general was being brought in to command American armies because apparently the Americans couldn't handle it themselves. The order is issued, the alliance holds, but a fault line has been opened and Bernard Montgomery is about to step into the center of it. Montgomery moved into the northern sector with the authority Eisenhower had granted. In his telling, he found disorder. In American memory, he arrived after the shock, when the line was already thickening with reinforcements. The truth sits in the tension between those two narratives. December 20th, 1944, Montgomery arrives at 1st U.S. Army headquarters. As snow continues to fall, he enters a command post that has been operating without rest for days. Maps are crowded with grease pencil marks. Unit locations lag behind reality. Staff officers look worn, hollowed by constant crisis management. Montgomery will later describe what he finds as disorganization bordering on collapse. His chief of staff records that General Courtney Hodes appears exhausted and uncertain. These accounts are not neutral. They reflect how Montgomery wants the moment remembered. What matters is what he does next. He imposes structure. He shortens lines. He pulls American units back to form a continuous northern shoulder of the salient. British 30th Corps is positioned as a strategic reserve behind the American front. Defensive belts are clarified. Artillery coordination improves. The risk of a sudden German breakout toward the Meuse is reduced. Montgomery does competent work. The northern flank stabilizes. The line stops bending further. German momentum slows where it matters most. But this is not a rescue in the cinematic sense. It is a defensive reorganization under pressure. The crisis has not passed. It has only been contained. South of the Bulge, another American commander is preparing something far more aggressive, and the center of gravity of the battle is about to shift. December 19, 1944, 3 days into the German offensive, George S. Patton is already moving. At 3rd Army headquarters, Patton does not ask whether he should attack. He asks when. His staff has prepared contingency plans in advance, anticipating exactly this kind of crisis. What Patton executed next would rank among the most remarkable operational feats in military history. Within 72 hours, Patton disengages 3 divisions from active combat in the Zizar sector. He pivots his army 90 degrees to the north. Roads are icy, fuel is scarce, snows every movement. The maneuver is operationally audacious. More than 100 meters of winter march under combat conditions. The 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 81st Infantry Division moved through ice storms and destroyed bridges while maintaining operational security. On December 26th, units of the 4th Armored Division led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams break through German defenses near the village of Eisenhower. At approximately 1650, the Sherman tank Cobra King makes contact with elements of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. The siege of Bastogne is broken. The surrounded 101st Airborne Division is relieved. By early January, Patton's forces are driving north into the German Bulge from the south, while Hodge's 1st Army attacks from the north. Air power returns as the weather clears. German supply columns are torn apart from the air. Fuel shortages armored units already stretched thin. By January 3, 1945, the outcome is no longer in doubt. The German offensive has failed. The Wehrmacht begins to withdraw. The greatest crisis the Western Allies have faced since Normandy is over. And that is precisely when Bernard Montgomery decides to speak. January 1945. The guns have not fallen silent, but the emergency has passed. At his headquarters in Belgium, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery studies the aftermath of the battle. Maps show a front restored. The German salient is shrinking. The immediate danger to Antwerp has been removed. Montgomery believes the record needs correcting. He tells his staff that the public does not understand what really happened in the Ardennes, that British forces played a decisive role that has gone unnoticed, that his assumption of command stabilized the situation on the brink. The intention, as he frames it, is clarification, credit where credit is due. His staff advises caution. American commanders are sensitive. The temporary transfer of U.S. armies to British command remains politically raw. They suggest any public accounting should come from Eisenhower. Montgomery dismisses the concern. He prepares notes. He shapes his narrative carefully. He does not see himself as provoking controversy, but as restoring balance to the story. The battle is over. This, to him, is the moment to speak. January 7, 1945. He calls a press conference at his headquarters. Reporters gather expecting a routine briefing. They do not yet know they are about to witness a rupture, one that will not be caused by enemy fire. January 7, 1945. The press room is full. Montgomery begins by outlining the German offensive and his assumption of command in the northern sector. His tone is measured, confident, almost instructional. Then the emphasis shifts. The battle has been most interesting, he says. Possibly one of the most interesting and tricky battles I have ever handled. Handled. Not fought by American divisions in the snow. Handled by him. He continues describing how he got the battle area tidy, how he organized American forces, positioned reserves, and prepared for counterattacks. The language is precise, consistent, first person. I took certain steps myself, Montgomery says, to ensure that if the Germans got to the Meuse River, they would certainly not get over it. He speaks of deploying the full power of the British group of armies, of holding British forces back deliberately, of committing them at the decisive moment. You have thus the picture, he concludes, of British troops fighting on both sides of American forces who have suffered a hard blow. In the room, American correspondents stiffen. Pens move faster. They understand the implication. The Americans had been hit. The British had intervened. Montgomery had saved the situation. The words are calm. The damage is immediate, and it will not stop in this room. The British press loved Montgomery's press conference. London papers ran headlines about how Montgomery had saved the Americans. Monty clears up the mess. Read one. British general rescues Yanks, proclaimed another. British. Correspondents wrote stories emphasizing that when the Americans got into trouble, they had to call on a British general to bail them out. The tone was triumphant, even gloating. The British public, exhausted by 5 years of war and sensitive about playing second fiddle to the Americans in their own liberation, ate it up. The American reaction was volcanic. American correspondents who had been at the press conference immediately filed stories emphasizing Montgomery's arrogance and his dismissal of American contributions. Within hours, American newspapers were running editorials condemning the press conference. The military newspaper Stars and Stripes was particularly harsh. American GIS in Europe read Montgomery's words and were furious. They had fought the Battle of the Bulge. They had held Bastogne. They had stopped the Germans in snow and fog and desperate cold. and now some British general was taking credit. This time it is public. This time it is written. Bradley understands what this means back home, to Congress, to families who have just received telegrams, to an army that believes it fought its way out of the Ardennes. By nightfall, the crisis has moved beyond press relations. It has entered the command structure itself, and it will not stop there. Bradley does not explode. He decides. At his desk in Luxembourg, he begins drafting a resignation letter as commander of the 12th Army Group. The words are restrained. The meaning is not. He will not serve under conditions where American armies are publicly diminished by an Allied commander. He calls in his senior staff. They support him quietly, firmly. If Bradley resigns, others will follow. Courtney Hodges, George Patton. The structure beneath Eisenhower will crack. When Eisenhower learns what Bradley is preparing, he understands the scale of the danger. This is no longer about personalities. It is about the alliance itself. An American resignation at this level will ignite Congress. It will dominate headlines. It will poison civil-military relations at the moment the war is entering Germany. Eisenhower calls Bradley directly. He asks him to wait 48 hours. He promises to intervene to make it right. Bradley agrees, not because he is satisfied, but because the stakes are larger than his pride. Eisenhower then turns to Montgomery. The conversation is tense, controlled. Eisenhower explains the consequences that American commanders are threatening to resign, that the command structure is on the brink. Eisenhower tried to explain the tone, the emphasis, the constant use of "I" handled, the implication that Americans couldn't manage without British help, the dismissive treatment of Patton's achievement. Montgomery is genuinely surprised. He insists he meant praise. He says he described a fine Allied picture. He does not understand why the Americans are offended. Eisenhower realizes the problem. Montgomery does not hear what others hear, and the clock is still running. In London, the danger is immediately understood. Winston Churchill has spent 5 years holding the Anglo-American alliance together through strain, exhaustion, and unequal sacrifice. He knows how fragile it can be. He also knows this crisis cannot be left to generals alone. On January 18, 1945, Churchill rises in the House of Commons to speak about the Battle of the Bulge. Every sentence is deliberate, every emphasis chosen with Washington in mind. He praises the victory. Then he shifts the weight. Churchill makes it unmistakably clear that the battle was overwhelmingly an American fight, that American armies bore the main burden, that American soldiers absorbed the shock and paid the price. The Americans have engaged 30 or 40 men for every one of ours. Churchill says they have lost 60 to 80 men for every one of ours. It does not soften the comparison. He underlines it. It signals to Washington that London understands the stakes and that Montgomery does not speak for the alliance. Churchill's emphasis also matches what the U.S. Army itself would later highlight. In participation and loss, the Bulge was overwhelmingly an American battle and would be remembered as such. He speaks of telegrams sent to American homes, of families receiving news of loss while the battle still raged. He names Eisenhower and Bradley directly. He places responsibility and credit where it cannot be misunderstood. Montgomery is mentioned briefly, correctly, without drama. The speech is diplomacy executed in public. By the time Churchill sits down, the message has been delivered across the Atlantic. Britain understands who fought the battle, and the alliance has been pulled back from the edge. But the damage is not undone. It has only been contained. 3 days later, Bernard Montgomery issues his clarification. It is not an apology. It is an explanation. He writes that he has always held the highest admiration for American soldiers and their commanders, that his intention was never to diminish their contribution, that he was devoted to Eisenhower and considered him one of the great Allied leaders of the war. The phrasing matters. So does what is missing. Montgomery does not acknowledge the implication of his words. He does not concede the tone, emphasis, and ownership mattered to American commanders. It confirms what they already believe. He does not understand. Eisenhower meets with Bradley again. He explains what he has done. Churchill's speech, Montgomery's clarification, the damage control executed at the highest level. Bradley listens. Then he sets conditions. Montgomery will never again command American forces except in the most extreme emergency. No more temporary arrangements, no expanded authority. Eisenhower agrees. Bradley also insists that Eisenhower personally retain direct control of the Allied advance into Germany. No single thrust led by Montgomery. No appearance of favoritism. Eisenhower agrees to that as well. The resignation is withdrawn. The alliance holds, but the scars remain, visible in behavior. Bradley will not deal with Montgomery without Eisenhower present. Patton turns Montgomery into a joke, because ridicule is how armies express contempt. American headquarters grows colder. British headquarters becomes more cautious. Cooperation becomes formal, procedural, carefully managed. In the long view, historians will weigh Montgomery's claims only until they no longer persuade. His arguments are examined, not accepted. His version of events is measured against outcomes, not intent. Unity is preserved. Flexibility is sacrificed. And nothing between these men will ever be the same again. Montgomery did competent work on the northern shoulder. He reorganized a fractured front, stabilized the line, and integrated British resources without adding chaos. That much is not in dispute, but the decisive elements of the battle lay elsewhere. They were found in the endurance of American units during the initial German assault, in the resistance at Bastion, in Patton's winter counterstroke, in the slow strangulation of the German salient once air power returned and fuel ran out. Those actions broke the offensive. British units fought well when committed. Even British armored and support records acknowledged that Montgomery's planned counterattack did not come until early January, after the decisive crisis point had already passed. Montgomery helped hold the line. He did not win the battle. And that is why the press conference matters for a deeper reason. It exposed a structural tension inside the Anglo-American partnership. Britain brought experience, institutions, and generals hardened by years of war. America brought scale, speed, manpower, and the capacity to end the conflict. Britain feared being eclipsed. America feared being patronized. Montgomery's words made those anxieties audible. On January 7, 1945, the press conference lasted less than an hour. Its consequences lasted far longer. It nearly fractured the Allied command, just as Nazi Germany was beginning to collapse. Not because Montgomery lied about the map, but because he could not share credit without sounding like he owned it. In coalition warfare, that is not a minor failure. It is a structural one. Montgomery himself never fully understood this. In his post-war memoirs, he continued to frame the Ardennes as a moment of decisive personal leadership. To him, the backlash was oversensitivity, politics, misunderstanding. History has not been so forgiving. Modern historians judge his role clearly, capable, stabilizing, limited. He prevented further deterioration. He did not reverse the battle. American soldiers saved themselves. Eisenhower's true achievement was not tactical brilliance. It was management. He kept the alliance intact when it might have broken under the weight of words. On January 7, 1945, Bernard Montgomery spoke for less than an hour. In that hour, he nearly broke the Allied command. The war went on. The alliance survived, but it was never effortless